Welcome to our first episode of Harper Fox Trailblazer Talks, where we delve into leadership mentality, interviewing pioneering leaders who inspire you with their experience and knowledge. During this episode, we are focusing on mental health and joined by positive psychology expert and social entrepreneur Ruth Cooper-Dickson. Ruth founded global mental wealth consultancy Champs in 2015 and has since worked with a multitude of internationally renowned brands. Recognising the gap between corporate wellbeing support services and positive organisational culture, Champs was created to ingrain positive mental wealth within businesses to help them thrive. Ruth, welcome to Trailblazer Talks.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. We are so delighted to have you here. Really appreciate it.
Well, you're most welcome.
So tell us about your journey and how did you come to set up Champs?
It's really, I guess, quite interesting in the sense I had a long corporate career of about 18 years and I worked in aerospace, I worked in investment banking, wealth management, recruitment.
Yes.
That's where a lot of connection comes from. In the UK and overseas, and also diversity and inclusion consultancy. And it was when I was on the board of that particular company that I went through a lived experience of a divorce, which relationship breakup is obviously very common, but how I dealt with that wasn't the best. And what that meant was that I used unhelpful coping strategies or strategies that weren't helpful to me, coupled with throwing myself into work, which we often do when everything's not going well at home. We focus more on work, and that led to burnout. And I had a very public breakdown in my chief exec's office, which is never the best place if you're going to have a breakdown with all the glass walls. And I was then off work for a number of months, and I was diagnosed with generalised anxiety disorder and panic disorder. And for me, that was really a light bulb moment, because I'd had anxiety pretty much as far as I could remember, definitely from being around 17, 18. And I was using avoidance strategies in the corporate world to kind of deal with panic. And I thought everybody had panic attacks. I didn't know that's what they were. And I didn't talk about them because I thought it was me not being confident, or it was something that was wrong with me, a weakness. So I just kind of dealt with them and just didn't really talk about it and hid them from everybody. And so this light bulb moment of, right, you have got these two mental health conditions, but actually it was that sense of, oh, this kind of makes sense now and I can move forward with it. What was really interesting was in that period of time, and this wasn't that long ago, it was 5 years ago.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that long ago, but the conversation around mental health at work was so different back then anyway. And people didn't really reach out to me to see how I was when I was off work, as you would do if someone had been off for an operation or tonsillitis or flu, and so there wasn't really any of that kind of, not from a manager checking in perspective, but just kind of people sending me get well soon card or flowers, or because I was off for quite a period of time.
And do you think it's that people didn't know how to handle that because it was mental health?
Yeah, I think so. There was that sense of not being able to, I guess, find the right words or the right way of dealing with it. And that was very much the case when I returned into the workplace, because I think people didn't want to set the crazy lady off in the corner again, probably, because it was probably quite traumatic for other people involved in that.
What, to have seen you'd been really
definitely. Upset. And also, it's if somebody has been perhaps diagnosed with cancer, or if somebody's lost somebody close to them and they've had experienced a bereavement, like, what do you say to somebody? How do you find those words? And it's often with the best of intention that people don't want to upset somebody else. So it's kind of, I don't want to pry, I don't want to be really personal. Yeah. And because I was in a front-facing role, I was in a client-facing role where I would, spend a lot of time with clients, and suddenly I disappeared off the radar. And the language was, Ruth is out of the business, so no one really knew. So when I came back in, I chose to, and I hate this word, but chose to disclose the reasons why I'd been off. So when people were saying to me, hey Ruth, where have you been? Is everything okay? And I've always been, as you know me, really open and chatty. Yeah. So it was, a bit of a shock for them, for me not to be around. And I said, you know, I've had some mental health problems, I've been diagnosed, and this is my journey, I'm figuring out what this means for me.
And do you know what, to be honest, even me hearing you say that now, I'm thinking, what would I say back to that if I heard someone say it? Because that is not the average response of someone that kind of comes back, but it's so true of actually many people that are out of the business. I mean, that's happened to me, you know, so not to the extent, but, and I wouldn't have said necessarily what it was at the time, so it's really interesting.
Well, I think because I worked in inclusion, thinking of mental ill health from a disability perspective, I chose to champion it in that way. Yes. But what was, like, your point there about, I would know potentially what to say back, is that was the difference, because actually people went, oh my goodness, are you okay? I'm really glad you told me, or wow, I'm really honoured you shared that information with me. Yeah. And then it started a conversation around, that happened to me, or as you just said, you know, something very similar, or it's happened to somebody in our workplace, or my partner, or my sister, or my niece, or whoever it is. Everyone had a story, and it just got me thinking, like, why aren't we talking about this? And that was literally my catalyst then to saying, right, I'm not just going to focus on inclusion and diversity from that perspective, because for me, well-being was always the wrapper that sat around who we are, because it does change throughout our lifetime. It does change as we grow. So it's never constant, and it doesn't matter what background we're from, who we are as a unique individual. Our mental health is so personal, and it has our own frame of reference to it. So I was like, right, I'm going to start banging the drum about mental health in the workplace, which wasn't sexy and no one was talking about it at all. And I was like, talk about it more at work. And that was like literally how Shams started.
That is an incredible story. Thank you for being so open and honest as well, because like I said, that was quite thought-provoking even for me. I'm thinking, gosh, you know, how would I deal with that, or how would I've got to ask you said it was quite a public meltdown. I hope I'm not throwing too much. Did you just go into the office and it all just became a bit too much or overwhelming, or how did you, I think you said it was your chief exec at the time, how did he or she kind of react to that?
Well, they weren't in the office. What had happened was, I was clearly unwell about a month before. I was becoming really unwell, and it was actually on the Friday before I had a conversation with my mum, and my mum is, or used to be, a nurse and a midwife, so she's very good at this kind of language, and she just took it from a perspective of, I really think you need to go to the GP and make an appointment. And I was like, what do you think's the matter with me? She's like, well, you're telling me you're waking up crying every morning, that you're not coping. And to be fair, I was in a pretty dark place in terms of suicidal thoughts. I wasn't in a very good place at all, really. And she says, I think you really need to get some help. And although I was massively defensive, I did take that on board. And that Monday, I think I was kind of preparing myself. I tried to call the GP, and the receptionist, I didn't have any appointments, and it was the usual, we haven't got anything and we're really busy.
You were breaking.
Can you tell us what's wrong with you?
I don't know.
And I remember walking into the office feeling that everything was just, I mean, it was leaking all out of me. And because what had happened was, I'd had a really severe panic attack. And when I have panic attacks, not so much now, but in the past, I have what's called depersonalization, which basically means I feel out of my body, and I could be sat here with you and really not know who you are or where I am, or it's quite frightening. Okay, and I mean, I've been dealing with that for years and not telling anybody, running off and, you know, hiding in the toilet or whatever it was. So, and it was, I'd gone into my chief exec's office to make the phone call to the GP, and then it just all was coming out, and then people were sort of seeing what was going on, and one of the admin team came in and tried to calm me down, and then I actually don't remember. I went to the GP the GP then emergency called me. I went in, but I actually don't remember a lot the following 2 weeks. It was like my whole brain and body just shut down.
And that's probably a coping strategy in itself, isn't it? A mechanism inside then, it sort of blacked out a little bit. Yeah, no, wow, amazing, gosh. Okay, so then you went on, you founded Champs, which is incredible. So tell us a little bit more about Champs and maybe some of the achievements of the business.
It's been 5 years, and it was a really hard, tough process at the start. And actually, I wasn't really expecting to start a company. It was more just me on my mission. Changing the world. That's right.
I can relate to that.
I'm going to change the world, and this is how I'm going to do it. Put my little cape on, tiara, let's go. And that was it. And it grew, I think, because I was doing something so different, because I wasn't talking about training courses. I mean, we do a lot of training, we deliver different types of training, but actually it's about the culture change and the fabric and having those conversations, more about behaviour and organisational change. So I was doing something probably quite different. So it was just me as a consultant. Then I brought on my assistant Marilyn. Then I was getting a lot of work naturally because of my contacts in corporates anyway, and because of the work I've been doing in diversity and inclusion. And I was using those contacts within the inclusion space to say, yes, you're focusing on gender, yes, you're focusing on race and disability and sexuality, but what are you doing around mental health and well-being? And it was always just doing fruit baskets on a Friday or, you know, yoga once a month. So I began that conversation, and then it just snowballed. And really, there's been a couple of big achievements, I think, going from sort of 18 months ago from just me and Marilyn to now a team of, you know, the wider team is probably about 19 people.
I mean, that is incredible.
Yeah.
You know, we're growing a business, I'm growing a business myself, and I have to say that is an incredible piece of growth.
Well, it was just having a conversation with my accountant, who's kind of my finance guru, and having those, as you know, having those conversations. And he turned around to me, he's got a very successful accountancy firm, and he said, you need to make a decision now. Are you going to stay as Ruth, the consultant, with a couple of associates, and that's what you're going to do, or are you going to build a business? And I was like, I'll build a business. But once I did that, once I made that mindset kind of shift, it all kind of fell into, I think it was just that tipping point of, am I going to do this or not? You know, it's the safer, we were talking before about being safe and fear, and just going, well, I'm going to do this. And then last year we just went global. So I was in Hong Kong and Australia and Bali and Chicago, Seattle and San Francisco and Europe delivering. So our corporate clients were saying, can you go, you know, all across the world to do what we do here, predominantly in the UK. So that shifted us again. And then with the pandemic this year, we've just, as you will be proud that we survived 2020, when so many people sadly haven't with small businesses, or they've really felt that. I mean, we felt that, but I think having a strong foundation, having a strong team is what kept me going, as I'm sure it has done with you.
And I think a strong purpose.
Yeah.
Because really the business has been kind of, it's organically grown, but it's all come from purpose.
Yes.
And then when you've kind of got that, and you've got something that's really relatable, and an experience that you've lived as well, then you're so passionate about it, aren't you?
Well, everyone that we bring on, and we've just done another round of recruitment for next year, and we've really asked people to kind of share their stories in the interview, because actually that's what makes Shants really special, is the fact we are human.
Yes.
And that, you know, I did a talk at a client, a global investment bank a couple of weeks ago, and they said in front of everybody on the webinar that they had met with lots of different people, and they loved working with Shants because I was human. And they said that was why we chose you to deliver, because, and when you think of it, an investment bank, which does have that corporate level, which it will do, you know, that it's about actually you are relatable, but also the fact I've lived and breathed the corporate world, and everyone in my team has. There's been nobody really that's come from a pure, say, clinical background. We do have now a number of psychologists on the team, which is really important, and I myself am moving into that professional doctorate space next year.
Yeah, I'm incredible, by the way. Massive congratulations.
Thank you. And doing research as well. But actually what clients love about my team is they don't see it from rose-tinted glasses, that you should be having hours every day with your team to do, you know, it's real. Everyone has targets, everyone has budgets. Businesses are made to flourish and to be sustainable. But actually, how do you do that with a human lens? How do you do that so everyone's kept psychologically safe?
Yeah.
So I think that's been also different.
Yeah, that's a really interesting term, psychologically safe. I've not come across that before. Tell us a little bit more about that actually. That'd be really interesting.
Well, psychologically safe is having a workspace whereby people feel they can speak up, not necessarily to whistleblow per se, but just to be able to say, I don't agree with that, or let me challenge you, Scarlett, as the manager. Let me say, actually, I think we should perhaps try it a different way without fear of bullying or being ridiculed. The fact that they can come to work and they can be their genuine, authentic self. They don't have to hide. And this again isn't about, I say this and people think, oh, we've got to come and share everything. And not everyone is that person, right? And not, but it's about knowing that you can be yourself and you can talk about anything that if you need to, but you're not hiding parts of yourself as well, that you can be who you are.
So it does kind of come back down actually to being authentic, be authentically who you are, appropriately, considering our environment, that we're in our work environment, being authentic. And like you say, being able to be open, and it's safe really to be able to do so. And like you say, when you talk about something, because you're vulnerable, then straight away it touched on, an experience that I'd had in my work past, probably quite a long time ago now, probably about 10 years ago. And I thought, well, how did I deal with that at the time? And I remember sort of being in a room and just being really upset and crying. And I was meant to be doing a disciplinary for somebody. And I just had a baby, and my mental health was definitely not in the best place. I had lots of pressures at home and things like that as well. And I remember sitting there and thinking, I just don't think I can do this. And I could feel the tears kind of coming down my face, but thinking, I've got to hold this in, and I couldn't, I certainly didn't want to communicate that with anyone because it definitely didn't feel appropriate to do so at that time. But yet by you sharing that, it just triggered that within me, and I thought, no, I can absolutely share that. So it's
and it requires that courageousness with vulnerability, because it's what people connect to, as you've said from our conversation. And when you have that sort of psychologically safe environment, like without kind of, I guess, setting that intention, I've just done it between you and I, for you to be able to share back. Otherwise you wouldn't have probably mentioned that. So by a leader being able to do that, it creates that dynamic, and also it links back into respect and dignity for everybody. So how do you be psychologically safe with your own being? So what are your boundaries, like your work home boundaries? If you're opening them up all the time for work is 24/7, then of course people will naturally take advantage of that. And I don't mean that from a kind of malicious intention, but if you're always able to answer emails late at night or at weekends, and that will be expected just by our own behaviour. So how do you create psychological safety, starting with yourself, but then as a manager or a leader, how do you create that for everybody? And again, that goes back into your own behaviours as a leader. And your own boundaries, which is a very, very interesting point actually. So, okay, good. I mean, with that, you've obviously had some phenomenal success. The business is growing really well, but I can imagine, especially when you were going into it, you were quite open in saying actually my mental health wasn't in the best place, and I had to really work on that. So what have been maybe any sacrifices along the way? I think in terms of sacrifices, I have put a lot of heart and soul into Shamps, and building that in a way that has taken me away in lots of cases from family and friends, but that has been a choice. And I think there isn't this utopia, as you all know, of perfect harmony when it comes to work and home life. It just isn't. And I really hate that old adage of especially where they said, women can have it all now. Actually there's always a balance, there's always a trade-off with those factors, and nothing, you have everything neatly aligned, and then all of a sudden it's like something will go out the window. So how do you make it in a way that you sacrifice certain things and you spend time elsewhere? So I think there's been that sacrifice around my own kind of personal life in lots of ways. And in the early days, there has always been that, there was a trade-off as well with my mental health. I think being an entrepreneur, as you will know, you are always coming up with ideas. You are wanting to be, perfectionist. You do want to get everything done right now. And
as my vision is out here, like the vision for for the business is this, and the team are like, hold on, Scott.
I have a post-it note on my screen at the moment at home in my office, and it says not 600 miles an hour, please.
Because I borrowed that post-it note.
And I've shown it so many times in workshops. So I did a session with a CEO and the board of a company last week, and I actually showed it to them. I went, look, this is my post-it note right here. Because again, it's reminding myself that not everyone works at that level, and not everyone operates into that kind of strain zone, stretch strain as much as I do, because I am the leader and I am pushing the business forward, and it is that meaning and purpose that comes from you. So I think over the last 5 years, because I still am in recovery with, you know, my GAD and panic disorder, I'm still on medication, I still work with my GP team. I had a panic attack, my first in 16 months, 4 weeks ago.
Oh wow.
And I went out to Sainsbury's round the corner on a break, and I'd woke up in the morning, and I, to be honest, it'd been building for some time this year with everything else. And you know, some people will have migraines, some people will get stomach problems, and I think now I've really got to understand that panic attacks sometimes are my way now of just kind of my body's way of going, hang on, you're not listening, you are exhausted, you are tired, you need to calm down. And so I went to Sainsbury's, and I could feel, you know, I'd felt it all, and I'd said to my mum, which again is a big difference to how I would be in the past. Like, it would have been a shock before, whereas I was like, something's not quite, it's this sense of something's not quite right, what's going on?
So you're more tuned in.
I'm really tuned into it, and I was in Sainsbury's, and I could then feel it coming, and I had this weird thing, and I'm doing that whole site depersonalisation. I'm walking around Sainsbury's thinking, what am I in here for? And I'm just looking at random things. And then I was in the queue, and what happens to me is I call my panic attacks meltdowns. I would never describe somebody else's as that, because it does have for some a negative connotation, but meltdown for me is because I literally go from looking like this to sweating buckets in seconds. Okay. You know, and you know in The Wizard of Oz, really old reference, but where the Wicked Witch of the West is, she's melting at the end, and she's like, I'm melting, that's what it feels like. I'm in this puddle, and I'm standing there in the queue in Sainsbury's with what I need, and sweat is dripping off me, and I'm like, and I was having this whole inner dialogue of, I'm not leaving, I'm not running out, and this is the whole thing, because my body, my brain is telling me, you need to get out, you need to run, like it's the whole fight flight, and I'm like, no, I'm staying here, and I'm literally, and I'm sure the security guard that I stole something, because he's like, and I'm there like dripping with sweat, like I just like raided the cake aisle or something, like, and I got out and I ripped my mask off, you know, and what was really interesting was the first people I messaged was my team, and I've never done, and I said, we were on our Slack channel, and they'd commented about some piece of work, and I said, I've just had a panic attack. Next thing I know, phone's ringing.
I
was very matter of fact about it. To the point. But it was that whole thing of, you know, work has been very hectic. I was out in the field with my other business, Chance for Change. I was working in a refugee camp in October for a month. There's been so much, and I work in trauma, is what I do. So of course I've been absorbing everyone else's trauma and dealing with my own of this year and not having a break. And I'm human too, you know, yes, I work in this space, but sometimes we just, you know, I don't get a chance to have a break all the time, or life does get in the way, and I try and make the best of it and put those practices in place. But actually what I really was proud of this time was I noticed that I didn't let it overrun me. I told my team, and actually that was on the Thursday, and by the weekend I cleared my diary, didn't do anything, and by the weekend I was much better. And actually what I didn't do was berate myself for it. I was like, this has been a sign, you've got to slow down, because you're going to finish at the end of the holiday, before the holidays, and you're going to collapse. So this is a big warning sign for you to start to wind down slowly. And I think actually just sharing that vulnerability with my team has enabled them to go, yeah, we kind of saw it, so we're glad, and this is kind of like what you need to do. And it's just, again, they do respect it, I think.
Absolutely, yeah, you would. I think you know what, I really appreciate you being so vulnerable and so honest, because it is so very relatable. But I'm just thinking there's so many leaders, especially, you know, and entrepreneurs that you talked about, and actually just people in day-to-day life that are under these huge pressures as well. Is there anything that maybe you'd recommend to someone that was in that position, you know, that they felt like they're feeling really anxious, they're feeling panicky, they're concerned about their mental health maybe, that perhaps there's some steps maybe that they should take, and they perhaps don't know what's even happening to them?
Yeah. I would always, if you're concerned, my first port of call is always speak to somebody. So whether that is your GP, if you feel comfortable going to the GP, but because of that whole feeling of you have the average appointment's 6 minutes, and that's a lot when you're wanting to talk about how you're feeling. So what I usually suggest to people is you write down how you're feeling, because at least when you get into the GP's room, it doesn't overwhelm you, and then you end up saying, oh, I've got a really bad cough or something really random, because you just don't want to talk about it. So that's a really good practice if you're not used to it. To talk to a friend, talk to a colleague. If you're in the corporate world, you might have an employee assistance program you can dial and speak to somebody. They are confidential, and they're usually 24/7. You can get hold of somebody, or use a charity or an organisation. And aside of that, I would just think about what your own self-care practices are, because a question that came up recently with a leader was, we're expecting to kind of take on board now employee well-being, because the government, NHS, everything is so overrun in terms of no funding and wait lists. So we are expected as employers, as you know, to kind of have that duty of care, but it's much deeper than it used to be. A bit like when health and safety kind of came into force, and it was a real shift in the 80s, 70s, 80s. So how do you then look after yourself as a leader? So what are your self-care practices? And I use self-care, I use actually now self-preservation, because I think working in humanitarian aid in the last year, I found that actually that's what you need. It's almost an idea of building up your resilience, building up those practices. And I think that's also why I've recovered so quickly from this panic attack, is because I've spent so long now building those practices in, that then they're habits that I have, and that they mean that when I have a setback, it doesn't really knock me all the way back. It's just a knock, and then I can pick them back up again. So it's that understanding what that looks and feels like for you, which takes a bit of soul searching, and it's finding your way of being able to go, what is it that helps me feel relaxed? What is it that I really enjoy doing? Where do I laugh most? Like what does my inner child love doing?
And how am I feeling? Because I think a real big one is, how do I have to ask myself, Scarlett, how are you feeling right now? And Scarlett, what do you want to do? Because you're so conscious of the expectations, or even whether that's inside of work or outside of work, what my daughter wants, what one of your team members want, or your clients asking X, Y, and Z, or what do you want to do, Scarlett? What feels good for you?
And I ask that every time I do a talk or workshop. How are you feeling today on a scale of 1 to 10? In the world of Zoom now, put in the chat box 1 to 10. How do you feel? Because I've been doing that for 5 years as part of my journey, so I know where I sit on the scale of 1 to 10. I know what my okay is, I know what my not okay is, and I know when I'm really kind of slipping. So how do you sense that? And I heard a really good quote the other week. I was on a trauma workshop, and the quote was that busyness is the anaesthetic to pain, because when we're really busy, we don't stop and think. Everything feels great, but actually when we have time and when we do pause, that's when everything starts to bubble up if things aren't okay.
And I absolutely agree. And I think, especially with everything that's just happened, with the COVID pandemic, we've seen a lot of mental health issues, and it's not necessarily, some of it is people aren't used to being in lockdown and being in the house, absolutely, but people have had a lot more time to think, and sometimes that's not a good thing for people as well.
Well, we've seen a lot. We've kind of been asking clients over the last few weeks as to what sort of areas that they've been really concerned about, and loneliness and isolation was one of those that did come up. And if you think before COVID, there was a report that was done by the Red Cross and Co-op that said it's like 9 million people in the UK feel lonely. Feeling lonely equates to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, physically what it can do for us. And we've got a minister for loneliness now, we did have. So, there's a real sense about people are very isolated. And I think especially in big cities where family or friends are potentially not close by, or you live with housemates, or you live alone, and you don't have necessarily those deep connections with people. Because even though we're really connected digitally, there is that sense of those deeper connections we just don't
Definitely.
have.
And just seeing people and
Yeah.
feeling that, the energy and all of that kind of stuff, looking at people's body language. Yeah. Gosh, you've really surprised me by that statistic, the loneliness one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that was such an issue. Gosh. So we work predominantly within the engineering and energy sectors, which are very male heavily dominated, and we know that unfortunately the male suicide rate is obviously considerably higher than female. So I just wondered, why might that be, and is there anything that we can really do to help?
The highest rate of suicides is with males aged 45 to 49, and we have seen an increase in death by suicide since 2013. We've seen a big increase, and I think when we look at the statistics when it comes to males, 84 men take their own life in the UK every week, and they're the numbers we know about. And we look at kind of how men predominantly cope with poor mental health, and that is starting to change, but it has been very much about not sharing and not being open. Women across the World Health Organization recognises that women do two things, no matter what cultures and backgrounds they're from. We either use our support networks, so we use our friends, we use our family, we speak to people, or we seek professional help. There has been in the past where we look at a traditional masculine role, that it was somebody who was able to cope. We hear phrases like "man up,"
Yeah, we do.
and
provide, protect.
And you're supposed to keep all of that together. And in the past as well, where in a relation, if you've got a relationship with the man is the breadwinner of the family, where everything falls to that individual to bring money in, to pay the bills, to keep the roof over their head. There is a lot of pressure there.
Huge pressure.
We also see that, statistically speaking, that men use alcohol and substance misuse as a coping mechanism.
Right.
And we know that correlates with high risk of death by suicide. And we also know that men, when they do take their own life, they use more violent means, so there's less recourse of that situation. So it is really it's such a taboo still. I teach mental health first aid training. I am trained in applied suicide intervention skills training as well. And even just talking about that word suicide, for lots of people, it is a very emotive word.
Yes, and it's very shocking, isn't it?
It has a lot of, it has a huge amount of taboo to it, because up until in the 1960s, it was illegal to take your own life.
Oh, right.
So if you did take your own life, if you attempted to take your own life and you didn't complete your suicide, then you were either sent to prison or you were sent to what was the old asylums. So that is where the phrase to commit suicide comes from, which is why we shouldn't use that anymore in terms of language, because it was an illegal act. But actually, if we think about 1960s, it's not actually that long ago.
No, it's not
really. When we're talking about the generations that we have, and language is hugely powerful. So when I mentioned before, and I tried to be really open and honest about my own experience about having suicidal thoughts, because I was in that, and that's been part of my life. But again, that's a huge taboo, because when you say that out loud, what does that actually mean? What are other people thinking? That's very frightening, and that's something that I've worked with and spent time learning about and feeling comfortable to share that. But actually, that is, if somebody says that to you in a conversation, immediately it's hugely emotive. How do you support that person? What do you do?
And it also, I would think, in some people would trigger you to think, is that person stable, or is that person going to be okay in the workplace? If I give them a job, are they going to be able to function on a day? There would be an element of some people thinking that as well. Certainly. And
suicidal thoughts are actually really common.
Yeah.
They're not they're a lot more common than people think. And when we look at those statistics, and I said about that, you know, when we look at with men, 84 men in the UK, they're the one numbers we know of.
Yeah.
But we don't read about those, we don't hear about those on the news. It's the only time we ever really hear about somebody who's completed their suicide is if they are somebody in the public eye or a celebrity, and we hear about it that way.
Yeah, that's
we
very
don't,
true,
we
actually.
don't hear about,
Yeah.
you know, we don't hear it regularly on the news, and it has huge ramifications, a huge ripple effect on everybody that is around that person. And for those people that do attempt, for those people who do complete suicide, I think the statistic is around 16 others will attempt to take their own life in that same. So again, we're talking about somebody who's felt that, you know, low, that they felt that there's no other option for them, and actually the ramifications of that within a, for example, in the workplace, within a team, you know, somebody that you're sat next to, somebody who you work with, not only for those family and friends, but also it does filter out, is part of that workplace community as well, which is often where my team are called in to kind of work with teams who have experienced that.
Yeah, wow. And who can put the support mechanisms in place, or, you know, the kind of the suggested ideas, really, I suppose, to support the team and the leadership team as well.
And just have that space to acknowledge and have a conversation about what that means, because it will bring up for everybody something within them.
Yeah.
And I think it's so sad when I run sessions on mental health first aid or mental wealth training, and, you know, there's always somebody who knows somebody or has been touched by suicide, and it, you know, but this is where we're still so far from talking about mental health. You know, we're still in a place whereby that is something we've really got to work at.
Yeah, it feels quite taboo, doesn't it? Even some of the conversations we've had today, it feels like, oh, there could be a bit taboo subjects.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Wow. And I suppose from your perspective, within the world of business or within the workplace, if there was anything you could change, it doesn't necessarily have to be mental health related, just your own personal perspective, what would that be?
What would I change? For me, it would be having more empathy. Yeah. I think. Because to be an empathetic leader and to have that courage and vulnerability would make everything, I think, a lot easier to share and to create a culture of kind of open, honest, authentic workplace. Yeah. And as we spoke about before, this isn't about everyone coming in and sharing all their problems and not doing any work and let's have group therapy. But just being able to recognise, again, when people need to be rewarded, as in, well done, Scott, thanks for doing that, it was a really big help, you know, and also just connecting in with, is everything okay today? You don't seem, the last few days you've not seen yourself, is everything all right? Yeah. Or, look, this is going to be a really tough assignment, and it's, you know, but I want you to know that I'm here for you every step of the way. If you need anything, you shout me, let's go through it. Or, you've messed up, Scarlett. Okay, what have you learnt from that? What would you do differently next time? Yeah,
and I think that's where it comes down to more intuitive leadership, actually, doesn't it? And really understanding our people, understanding our teams, and like you say, making it that more kind of open workplace, you know, that people can be their authentic selves. So yeah, no, that's incredible, thank you. So what's the biggest lesson that you've learned, and what would your advice be to the future generation?
My biggest lesson has probably been that most people actually don't know what they're doing.
Yes!
And, you know, we all kind of make it up as we go along. I have 2 business degrees, and still there's stuff in that I haven't used. Yeah, there's stuff that I've just had to figure out on my own. No one tells you, as you know, how to sit down. Here's how you set up a business. Off you go. So you learn it as you go along. So I think that's been the biggest lesson, because I spent a lot of time, especially in my corporate world of kind of those 18 years of thinking that everybody knew the answers to everything, and that's also okay. You don't know the answer. In fact, it's sometimes good that you don't know the answers, to say, I don't know the answer to that, or let's get an expert in who does. And as a leader, I think the biggest lesson has been surrounding yourself with people who are almost better than you in different areas. And I love that, because I think that's what's happened within Shants, especially in the last 18 months, is that I know what my sweet spots are. I know what I love doing. I know what gets me out of bed in the morning and I'm really passionate about. And of course, there's always those bits of your job you have to do that aren't, you know, the fun bits. But what I've really tried to do with Shants, which I think has worked, is that everybody plays into their sweet spot, and that enables people to be really productive, love what they're doing, and be a high performer. So I think that has been that side of it. And for a younger generation, I would always say yes to every opportunity, and just do it. I mean, I've done some things in my career where it's taken me to live in Brazil and Hong Kong and Australia, and worked in incredible industries where I've just thought, I don't know if this is going to be right, but I'm going to have a go. And I think when I talk to people who are 20 years younger than me, who are starting out into their career, and they're like, oh, I've got to have this map and I've got to have this journey. I'm like, look, it doesn't work that way. Because what I've also found is where people have really aimed for this position, or they've aimed to be this in their career, is that they've got to that point and then they've gone, oh, what's next? Or is this it?
And it can be a big disappointment, or it's not what they want, and you've formulated your whole life around this point, everybody supports you, and you're like, actually, I really don't like this. Should I say this or not?
I find that I did a podcast, New Rules, and one of the speakers, one of my guests, is a doctor, and he trained as a doctor, and then now he's gone off and done entrepreneurial and health tech, and he got to that point where he was like, actually, this isn't making me happy, and he got to that point of being a registrar. So it's kind of that whole thing of especially when you're in one of those careers which involves a lot of qualifications, professional qualifications, and sometimes it's not even you that's driving it. It might be your parents, or
other pressures, social pressures.
I need to be this. I need to go to university. I mean, I dropped out of university the first time round after 3 months. And
you've more than made up for it now, Ruth.
So I think, just go for those opportunities, because life has life has a way of figuring it out.
Yeah, it does. And I think the biggest advice that I'd probably give, thinking of my daughters now, is kind of enjoy the journey. It's a journey. So you need to enjoy that journey. And if you're not enjoying it, then maybe divert a little bit, or like you said, try different things out, because sometimes you realise you're good at things you never knew that you were good at, because you've never actually tried anything different.
Well, I never got into the positive psychology space and starting my clinical doctorate next year at 43. I'm like, seriously? Like, am I 43? You know what? I've still got another 40 years probably.
That's what I was going to say. I was looking at something the other day actually, and there was about a woman, and she was deciding whether she wanted to study, and I think she was like 36, and they were like, well, do you want to be a 8-year-old or 9-year-old with a degree in this, or do you want to be a 39-year-old with no degree in that area? And she was like, yeah, you're right, actually. No, I'd rather be the latter. So age is but a number. So.
And I think you bring more as you do get older as well. Then you bring a different lens to what I've learned so much from younger people that I study with and work with. But actually, I have a different insight as well. So it enriches that experience.
Yeah, diverse perspectives.
Yes.
Ruth, thank you so much for sharing your personal story, all of the insights. They've been really inspirational, and I'm hoping that they will be really helpful as well to everybody that's listening. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Ruth, are you ready?
I am. Let's go.
Brilliant, let's go. So, what do you like to do for fun?
Cold water sea swimming.
Wow. Okay. What does equality mean to you?
Inclusion and also equity for all.
Oh, I love that. Okay, brilliant. What would you say to your younger self?
Don't pay attention to what anyone else is doing.
Yes, agreed. Who inspires you?
most people, most days, working in the field that I do, I think somebody always teaches me something and has that inspiration for me.
That's incredible. What makes an exceptional leader?
Empathy, courage, vulnerability.
What does sustainability mean to you?
Creating growth for the future and leaving a legacy for the next generation.
Oh wow, fantastic. And tell us a motivational word or phrase to inspire others.
Choose to be unstoppable and live a courageous life.
Ooh, that was fantastic. That was a really good lightning round.
Is that it?
That's it.
Oh gosh, I was just trying to come up with some more.
No, we're ready to go. That was brilliant. Thank you, Ruth. Honestly,
Right.
really appreciate it. That was really inspirational.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
We're both like, thank you. I can't hug
I
you
know.
or say, yeah.